Today's lesson, we're going to really quick review from Algebra 1 how to graph a linear function. So first things first, linear is a fancy word that means line, and you guys would have seen this in Algebra 1. So all formulas, if you graph them, they present shapes. This is the formula that would get you the shape of a line. The M, if you don't recall, it stands for slope. Slope is a fancy word for steepness. And then B stands for the y-intercept. And if you're not sure what the y-intercept is, that's the spot where the line crosses the y-axis. So I'm always a fan of showing pictures. Sometimes they're easier to understand than words. So here's an example of a linear equation. So if you were to plug numbers in for x into this formula, you'll generate a line. And their y-intercept is going to be this point right here. So it's always a starting number on the y-axis. Since this says positive 2, we started at positive 2 on the y-axis. And then your slope is a measure of how high you go versus how far you go. So that's called rise over run. So a lot of teachers teach that to their students, but it tells you how steep the line is, so that is the purpose of slope. Again, we're just going to jump right into refreshing our memories on how to graph these. So you always start with the y-intercept. I don't know why they've always decided when they wrote this formula to put the y-intercept on the end. So it's kind of like you start with the ending thing first. So you're going to go to positive 1 on the y-axis and you're going to draw a dot. Right. Then you're going to count. Now I don't want you to actually draw these lines, I just want you to count with me. This top number, that is called your rise. So that's how much you need to raise your pencil. So since it says positive 2, we're going to go up 2. And then the number on the bottom, that's your run. And I always tell my kids just to run to the right. Some teachers tell their kids, oh, you could run to the left if it's negative. That is so hard to keep track of. Just always run to the right. It's so much easier. So we're going to go up 2 spaces, 1, 2. And we're going to run 3 spaces to the right, 1, 2, 3, and that's where you're going to draw your next dot. So on your paper, you should have your first dot, and then you should have your second dot. All right. So I know a lot of times kids will go up 3 and up 2, and they'll put a dot here. You don't want to put a dot until you use both numbers of your fraction, and then you connect them, and that's the line that would result in. All right, we'll go ahead and try it again. So this time we're going to start on positive 2 on, again, the y-axis. Now what they don't tell you, what you're supposed to realize is every number can be put over 1. So even though you don't see a fraction in front of x, there's always a fraction in front of x. So the fact that this says negative 4 means you go down 4. So down for negative, up for positive. So we're going to count down 4 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's always from your starting dot, not from the middle, from your starting dot. And then you're going to go 1 space to the right and then connect. And then one more time, notice this time this says -1. I want you to think of that as -1 on the y-axis. So you're actually going to go down 1 to start your story. And from there, because this says -1/2, that just means we go down 1. We're always going to go to the right too. So you don't have to worry about, do I go right or left? Always go to the right. It's just a matter of, do you go up or down? And then connect. All right, D and E, those were very common graphs that kids always end up getting wrong because they didn't write any numbers for you. So you have to be disciplined enough to realize there's a 1 in front of every x. Even though they don't write it, there is a 1 there. And if you don't see a second number, then that's the same thing as saying +0. Adding 0 doesn't change the value of anything. So if you don't see anything, that means your starting point is 0. So we're going to put a dot on 0. Now when you do your slope part, again, you have to remember that this is a fraction. You can put every number over 1. So you are going to go up 1 because this is a positive, and you're going to go right 1 and then draw an arrow. Letter E is the exact same thing, so I would put 1 over 1 in front of x, a +0 behind, and again, you're going to start at 0, but this time because it's negative, you're going to go down 1 and right 1. So they're almost the same line, it's just one's positive and one's negative. And then one more time for letter F, we do not have a second number here, so we start at 0. Now notice how this says negative 5/3. That just means we're going to move down 5 instead of up 5. That's all. Down 5 and always go to the right. Just always go to the right. Down 5, right 3, and there's your line. Now sometimes they like to make it a little bit more work intensive for you. So if you look at this problem right here, this looks very different than the problems we just graphed, and that's because y is not isolated. Right, so before you can even graph this, you have to have y by himself. So that 2x and that 3, those need to leave. So you will always follow this order. You're going to subtract the 2x over, because it doesn't belong on the left side with the y. But when you do this, you want to be careful. You are only allowed to stack x's with x's. 6 does not have an x, so don't write minus 2x under the 6. Just write it off to the side. These x's would cancel out, of course. They would make 0. So you are left with a 3y on the left and a 6 minus 2x on the right. So that's step 1. You're either going to add or subtract your x's over, depending on what sign was in the problem. And you're always going to finish with what I call divide, divide, divide. You have to divide every term by 3. That'll get your y nice and alone. 6 divided by 3 is 2, and it's very normal to get a fraction in front of x. So we just leave it as 2/3. Now you could circle that, and that technically is correct, but a lot of kids mess up the graphing because it's not in the actual formal order. So it might be a good idea to switch it and put the negative 2/3 x first and the positive 2 second. That way when you go to graph, it's a little bit more normal for you. So it looks like we're going to start at positive 2 on the y-axis, and from that point we're going to go down 2 and always to the right 3. So again, down 2 and right 3, and then draw a dot. And so there's your line. All right, our last cases are if your equations only have one variable in them, one letter. So if you just look at the previous problems we did, they had x's and y's in them. These do not. These have only an x or only a y, all right, but not both at the same time. So we approach these in a whole different manner. All you're going to do is, if it says x equals 3, is you're going to put a dot on 3 on the x axis. And then you're just going to draw a line straight up and down through it. That's it. What this means is, hey, you can graph a line, but all the x values of all the dots need to be 3. Well, then we can't go sideways at all. Otherwise, my x's would change. This is just going to be opposite, so we don't start on the x-axis, we start on the y-axis. So you're going to put a negative 2 right here, and instead of up and down, you're going to go side to side. And again, it means, hey, I don't care what your line looks like, but it has to stay at a height of negative 2 always. Well, that's how it's going to happen. So a good thing to take away from this is try to memorize the fact that x lines will always be vertical and y lines will always be horizontal.